Oh, hi, everybody, and welcome to Circle of Fellows, episode 54, I believe. Yeah, it is. Episode 54 of Circle of Fellows, the monthly panel discussion where I join four IABC fellows for a conversation about a topic that we believe will be of interest to communicators everywhere. I'm Shel Holtz. An IABC fellow. I'm director of internal communications at Webcor, which is a commercial construction company in San Francisco, headquartered in San Francisco. What you see behind me is Chicago. I am not sitting in Chicago. I would be freezing if I were sitting in Chicago. I'm taking advantage of the green screen capability, which is brand new to StreamYard, the service we use to broadcast this panel discussion. And I have Chicago up there. You can see the bean behind me because Chicago is the host city of the upcoming IABC World Conference, June 14th through 17th. I will be there. I assume many of you on the panel will be there, and it's shaping up to be another great conference. The last couple have been outstanding. And if you're interested, just visit iabc.com and consider registering and joining us there. We have a great topic today. We're going to be talking about the bottom line, how communication impacts business outcomes. We have a terrific panel today, and we'll go around the horn so you can introduce yourself. I'm going to start from the bottom right with you, Priya.
Hello, everyone. I'm Priya Bates, and I'm president of Inner Strength Communication based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I will be at IABC World Conference. Looking forward to speaking and connecting with my best friends around the world.
Looking forward to seeing you there and on the Friday Night Fellows dinner as well. Neil.
Hi, everybody. It's Neil Griffiths here. I'm based in the UK. You can probably tell from my accent if you've never heard me speak before. I am a senior manager in the global communication team for Environmental Resources Management, which is the world's leading sustainability consultancy. And our team is responsible for the employee communication. And I'm also global inclusion lead, so moving into diversity and inclusion in that space as well. I will be in Chicago. I'm looking forward to speaking there. Probably on some of the things that we cover in today's session.
Excellent. Jim.
Yes, I'm Jim Shaffer. I lead the Jim Shaffer Group, and we focus on helping organizations, both large and small, improve business and financial performance and operating performance by through strong leaders and through highly engaged people.
And Ned.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ned Lundquist. I am a writer. I work for a defense contractor called MCR Federal, where I'm a principal science writer, and I have my own company, Echo Bridge, where I've given myself the title of Chief Engagement Officer. It's a company. It's a one-person company, and my boss doesn't even give me holidays off. So I'm looking forward to seeing Neil next week at the Gold Quill Judging in London, and I'll probably see all of you in Chicago, at least at the Fellows Dinner.
And Chief Engagement Officer, I imagine there are engagement issues with no holidays off. You should make a case for that.
Yeah, I've been reminded of that. Yeah.
Right. So this is an important topic, because so many communicators come up through the ranks as writers or as craftspeople, and they come out of journalism and they report on things that are going on in the organization, newspaper style. Very few newspapers out there. Everybody's on an intranet now, but it's a lot of reactive reporting about what has happened in the organization. And I think that's important because people do need to know what has gone on in the organization, but those are not even table stakes, really, because if if communicators are not having an impact on business outcomes, when times get tough, it seems to me that the easiest things to cut are those that are not delivering any kind of ROI. So how do communicators do that? Let's start from 40,000 feet and just go around and share your initial thoughts on the role of communications in delivering business results, and then we'll get more granular with a whole list of questions that I have here. Jim, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I'd be glad to go first. I think one of the things that I spend most of my time on with communication practitioners is helping them make the shift from being an information distributor that has no potential impact on the organization to focusing on adding value and making results grow. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about the kinds of things that an organization needs to do in order to be successful with its customers and shareholders. All too often, what I see is communication practitioners who are in a public organization that is trying to make money, and they're actually a drain cost on the organization, because what they do is not greater, that is, the results they create are not greater than the cost of creating those results. So if you're going to increase on-time delivery by 20-25%, and that creates a certain kind of a gain, the cost to get there needs to be smaller than the gain itself, or you've drained value from your organization. All too many communication people need to start thinking like business owners.
Whoever wants to jump in.
Absolutely. I completely agree with Jim. The visual, whenever I'm presenting to communication teams and practitioners around the world, is that of the waiter taking an order. And as long as you are simply the order taker, taking the order and going away and delivering it, maybe sometimes from a menu of options, but never providing advice and counsel, you're never going to be invited to sit at the table and help make the decisions before they're finalized.
I'll go next. You're both right. It comes down to being able to make an impact means you're contributing to whatever that bottom line is. And it's going to be different for different organizations. When I was on active duty some years ago, I was the public affairs director for the Navy Exchange Service Command, which was an organization of over 100 huge retail stores and gas stations, lodges, uniform sales shops, big operation. And the admiral used to go around the room and he'd point at those of us that were in support functions, and he'd say, you're all overhead. You corporate communications, you general counsel, you HR, you safety, you're all overhead. And then one day I figured out a way to contribute to one of the merchandising departments in a way that it resulted in sales. And they became my champion. And then when the boss would go around the room, he'd say, you're all overhead, not you, public affairs, you're making money. And so that's how I broke in and got their respect. I contributed to the bottom line.
I would echo everything that's been said already. I mean, in my experience, there's no one solution to this. There's no one answer. I think every organization's going to have a very different view on what impact is. And there's many people who work in non-profits. Their sort of bottom line motivators, if you will, are going to be different to a for-profit entity. And I think that the trick is really getting to grips with the strategy of the organization, figuring out how communication specifically can make a significant contribution to the achievement and execution of that strategy. And then really being very deliberate and very focused around how you measure and demonstrate that you've had the impact on that organization.
And that's all about aligning the business strategy with the communication strategy. You don't have a communication strategy in and of itself.
Right.
You have to support the business plan. And if you don't know what that is, you're just marching in circles.
Well, I think that's where you need to start, Ned. I completely agree with you and Neil. And I'm seeing communication people doing the kinds of things that we're talking about. One of the things that I help people is when they start to say, well, how do I pick the right thing? Well, I ask several questions. Number one is, where are the best opportunities to improve performance by better managing communication? Number 2, what's the size of the opportunity? Number three, what's the root cause that's preventing it? Number 4, what does it cost to get rid of the root cause? Number 5, go for it. Start improving what you've just analyzed for yourself. And I'm finding that a lot more people are starting to appreciate that set of 5 questions so they can start identifying whether they're in one kind of a company or another kind of a company, how to go about identifying the opportunities. There are lots of people out there who are doing the right things. I did a project recently with, or not recently, a while back with Roger Dupree. We were doing a workshop in New York, and after the workshop, we got a telephone call from Kristen. I won't give her full name out, but she said to me, she said, you know, I learned an awful lot there with you all. I'm going to have you talk with my CEO. We talked with the CEO, the senior vice president of manufacturing, and we did a pilot project up in Delmar, New York. At the end of that pilot, after 5 months, we had $740,000 in savings, productivity increase of 8.5%, and an ROI of 700%. Kristen was able to take that success and move it through 7 other parts of the organization, and then eventually it became the global way that Owens Corning, that's her company that she was with, manages communication throughout the world. So it is doable.
So Jim, how did you narrow down on something that you could focus on and contribute with this communication effort to make that initial move the needle initially, so that you could then come up with something that you could convince the company to roll out worldwide?
The senior vice president of manufacturing was adamant about the fact that they had put $50 million into this company in terms of technology and relationship building inside the organization, and nothing came of it. And so he took us, Kristen and I, up to Delmar, and we interviewed the leadership up there as well as the employees. And what we identified is there was a huge split between the union and the management of the organization. It was so bad that when the head of the operation got up to give a presentation in their conference room, the union members turned their chairs around, opened up newspapers, and started reading. And so we kind of identified a gap there in terms of communication between 2 groups of people. We eventually worked with the groups. We used a lot of teaming, a lot of high involvement, performance building, and we started focusing on and getting people involved in the processes that were required to make these numbers better. So we identified it by just going up and listening to a lot of people and identifying the solutions.
I think that a lot of communicators listening to this, Jim, would wonder where the communication skills come into that type of an activity. I can imagine there are companies where the communicators would say, oh, for that sort of thing, we turn to our HR business partners. It seems to a lot of communicators who produce articles on the internet and the like, this is outside the scope of their responsibilities. So Priya, I'm wondering, you've done a lot of training on this kind of thing. How do you convince leadership, for example, that this is a communication activity, and where do you get the skills?
You know what's crazy lately, which wonderful lately, not necessarily crazy, is that a lot of the conversations and a lot of the organizations and clients that reach out to us are usually that executive level. They're not necessarily the communication professionals who are reaching out to us. It's people who say, I've got a business problem to solve. I think communication is the gap and it's something we need to fix. Can you come help? And that's been really exciting about having those conversations. At the same time, we're having communication professionals or communicators, if they refer to themselves that way, whine and complain about why they don't get the respect that they deserve. But what we are saying right now is that our challenges right now with getting that respect is not necessarily about capacity and capability, as it is about courage and confidence. And we really need to do things differently and have the courage to have different conversations and be accountable for results in order to drive the respect that we crave.
And sorry, so I think that it's so within reach. Again, in my experience, a lot of people that we work with as communication professionals don't know what they don't know. And it's not that there's this whole swarm of people who have just got it against the communicator. Actually, in my experience, if you have that courage and you take that step that Priya describes, it's a whole revelation for those people who might not have known, oh, I get it. If we do it this way, and if we structure our communication and we don't just focus on the tactic, we figure out what we want to drive as a result of people interacting with the content. It's this huge sort of surprise process for people, and they actually really like it. And then you get the advocates, you get people behind you. So I agree, it is about being bold. It is about sort of challenging that perception of the contribution you make to the organization, and really sort of going for it.
And Jim talked about the first big tactic that they employed was listening. And I think that communicators think of themselves as transmitters. Right. But we have to be receivers too, and we all know that excellent communication is two-way, is symmetrical communication, and we need to be the eyes and ears of an organization, as well as sort of the spokespeople for it.
And more than the dialogue, what we're actually influencing now is the conversation. So it's not just two-way, it's up and down, it's side to side, it's between, right, managers and their people, and with peer to peer. And the opportunity has never been better.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that I think each of us are saying similar things. That one of the things that I see is that a lot of communication people feel stuck in this role of communicating outward and saying stuff, and that communication is all about formal channels, when somebody needs to teach them. And certainly my clients get plenty of teaching about this, and that is that communication in an organization, the largest communication is what leaders say and what leaders do. Number two is in what the systems say, the reward systems, the incentive comp systems, and that sort of thing. And oh, by the way, formal channels, which actually the percentage of the hit in terms of performance is the lowest. I was working with a ConAgra Foods communication person who called me and said, we've got $2 million of damage in our distribution center in Indianapolis, Indiana. What do we need to do? We need to go in and help with that. And so he asked me to come in and guide the process, and I did. And one of the things that we found when we were talking to the employees is some people were saying it's a recruiting problem, we're getting the wrong people in here, and some people said it's a training problem. And Bob said one night over dinner in the hotel, this was in Marshall, Missouri, he said, what do you think it is? I said, I don't think it's either one of them. I think it's something I'm going to ask Julie about, who's the head of the operation. And so we went there that day. Bob, by the way, said, what are you going to ask? I said, just listen to me. It's going to be time-tested consulting questions. And he laughed and I laughed. And so, but we got there to the place, and Julie came out. She was the manager of the distribution center. And I asked her, I said, I've got just one question. What is the weighting of the incentive comp on the leadership team and the supervisors in the organization? I don't want to know what they get paid. I want to know what the weighting is of it. And she went back in her office and she came back to Bob and me and she said, I'm embarrassed to tell you this. It's 80% productivity, 10% quality, and 10% safety. She said, I guess we're getting what we're paying for, right? Absolutely. The incentive comp was communicating to people, keep running those things as fast as you can. If you slam into a wall and you damage it, just keep throwing it into the truck and chipping it out. We were able to put some teams together again, identify a better incentive comp weighting than we had, and we had a 65% increase in quality, 15% increase in productivity, and safety stayed the same at 0 injuries. So I think if communication people start thinking communication way beyond what's in a newsletter or social media or whatever it is, and think in terms of what's sending signals that are causing us to underperform.
And I think that's the evolution, isn't it? It's that operational approach that you've been talking about for years, Jim, to communication. It's understanding the business. It's understanding the pain points. It's understanding what are we saying, but what are we doing from an actions perspective to influence the behaviors that we're seeing.
Exactly.
And back to Shel's question around what the skills are, and
or competencies, which is a word that I have here.
Indeed. I don't want anybody that's listening to this to think that they've got to go out and get a business degree, because I don't think it's about that. It's not about being I suppose there's no harm in that, but I wouldn't say that that's necessarily what anybody's advocating. It's really getting a solid understanding of what the organization is about, how it functions, where it wants to go, and then really thinking about your craft and thinking about what you can do and the contribution that you specifically can make, and only you as a communication function. And that will really get you towards that that space of impact that we're all describing here.
One of the things that I, Neil, work with the communication people in terms of competencies, I have 5 of them that I focus them on. Number 1 is how to become a strategic advisor, which is a course that I created for IABC. Change management, what's that all about? Business and financial acumen, leadership development, and measurement. If they can really wrestle with those 5 and come together with them, I've found that they are just much, much higher performers than they were before they had that information.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
So we have comments here from Vic Morales. He said, in my experience, you need to view yourself as a business person first, communicator second. Be confident in asking tough questions no one wants to ask to get clear on strategy. You'll earn respect.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is a great opportunity to let everybody else who's watching live know that you can ask questions and make comments using the comment feature on YouTube or using the hashtag COF54 on Twitter, which I'm monitoring.
The one thing, Shel, sorry to pick up on this point a little bit. The one thing I would say, though, is that if you lose focus on delivery and on the tactical, really excellent tactical execution, you do that at your peril. And I think that, if people can't rely on you to do the basics, and they know that they can't come to you for the really excellent tactical execution, that sort of level of respect starts to wane. So you've really got to. It's a balance of both.
Well, I always say, like, I talk about my 5 eyes, right? So the implementation is implementation is the table stakes. It's the entry point for a communication professional. But then when we get into interact, integrate, influence, and impact, that's where we evolve into that strategic advisor,
right,
for sure. But you can't do it without having those basic foundations.
And I think sometimes if someone comes to you for some tactical effort, they might be asking for something that isn't really going to contribute to the strategy. It might seem like something important to them, but you need to find out what it is they're truly trying to achieve, what their measurable outcome would look like, and who their key audiences are. And they might come to you and say, I need a video. But maybe a video is not the way to get there. And so and I've had people that worked for me before say, yeah, but they're going to pay for it. They get the money. Let's give them the video. That's not really what is going to achieve their outcome, because they haven't thought through it.
That happened to me this week, Ned. I'm just going to put that out there.
But that's again, it's overhead becomes overhead, and it becomes very apparent that the video seeker was out of touch with the business of the business here. And so we have some obligation to help teach these people differently, because we've got a lot of really good people who are sometimes doing the wrong things and can do better things. When I look at Terry Simpson at FedEx, and I look at Kristen, and I look at Bob Kula and the other people I've talked about, these people are superstars. And let me tell you another thing, that because I'm very attuned to the compensation levels of the people I work with, because I'm oftentimes asked about what I think that where they should be in the compensation level. I can tell you with all assuredness, the compensation levels, when you start doing the things that the people that I've been talking about, your comp is probably going to double, if not triple. I know one in particular was making $150,000 a year. She started doing this into 4 or 5 different organizations, and she was at $350,000 to $375,000 within about 6 to 8 months. So there's more money there if you are, again, creating that money that you get.
I do want to get back to the notion of channels, and the fact that people come and say, I need a video, I need a brochure, I need an article on the intranet, indicates that they don't understand the communication models that are going to drive some sort of a meaningful result for the organization, although they think they do. But it seems to me that we do still need to have a grasp on the basics in order to, once we have strategized, to implement. I mean, even if what you're doing is driving the message through operations, you have to do it in a way that's going to succeed. You can't just, I mean, I had a CEO who insisted that, actually he was the president of the company, who insisted that if he told the right 3 admins, the word would spread through the entire organization. I think you really need to understand your channels and what works, and then implement. And if it involves, levels of reinforcement through the intranet or through, I don't know, digital signage or recommending a roadshow with executives or what have you, you have to know how to execute once you've strategized.
You remind me, Shel, of a conversation I had about a year ago with somebody in Orlando. And he was telling me the story, and the story was basically we have too much theft in our warehouse, and he turned to his communication people and said, "Could you put together a brochure about theft in the warehouse?" And he said, "Sir, but I don't think that the reason we have theft is because we don't have a brochure. Probably is some other root cause." And communication person started teaching the boss about the root cause and how communication really needs to attack the things that are causing the problem.
So what was?
Yes, I had an executive VP of. Oh, that's a good question, Jim.
They were leaving the doors unlocked.
Oh, we need a brochure.
Real simple solution.
We need a brochure for locking the door.
Sure about closing the doors. No, they just went out and said, "Hey, close the doors at night. Close the doors at night." It was a simple solution.
Ultimately, it really is about asking the right questions, isn't it?
It is.
Right? And that's what we need to learn to do. Like when we think of, if there's tactical communication professionals out there who are comfortable there and are struggling with what's the next step? What's the first thing I do? I think it's starting with, instead of just taking the order, asking the questions and being able to take it full circle, doing the research, asking the questions, creating the plan. Great to have a plan. And then once all is said and done and we've implemented it, coming back and saying what worked and what didn't. And it's going full circle with that conversation will actually help us take the next step to other programs that'll help.
I had a guy tell me recently, he says, you don't always have the right solutions, but you sure ask the right questions that lead us to make the decision, own that solution.
I worked for an HR executive VP who called me in and said morale is low. Hire Merits to do a 90-day morale campaign. We're going to do rallies and banners, and we'll have giveaways. And I said, and after 90 days, the reason morale was low will still be there, because I don't think morale is low because we're not having rallies and banners and giveaways.
And how many employees are rolling their eyes saying, here's the flavor of the month campaign that's coming up, and they're never going to solve the real problems. And that actually could lead to worse, like disengagement versus what they're looking for. Yeah,
they buy sugar buzzes.
Yeah.
It's all about listening.
I do want to raise a question, Ned. You made the point that listening is half of communication. My company actively pitches this notion of active listening, which started with the safety operations. But Priya, I gather from what you sent me by email that you were on the same webinar with Gatehouse the other day that I was on, that IABC hosted, the State of the Sector. You noted that 20% of internal communicators rarely measure, 58% occasionally measure, only 22% describe their approach as advanced and regularly evaluate and report back, which is distressing. But why aren't communicators? I mean, that's listening, right? I mean, that's one of the key ways we have to listen.
But it's also, I think it's fear of accountability. I think they don't really, I think we have to believe in ourselves and our impact before we can convince anybody else, any other leader or executive of what we have the power to do. And I think it starts with being ready to be accountable to the results. And sometimes, we've all been there. We've put out a goal and we failed, but at least we learned from that. We understood what we do differently next time. And I think we need to be brave enough to be able to be accountable in order to drive, the results and the pay and the all of the other things we're looking for in terms of the profession. But that accountability has always been key for me in my career, and definitely as a consultant. For those of us who are consultants out here, we can't be hired if we can't come full circle and say, here's what we plan to do, and here's what we did for you.
Mm-hmm. I have another thought on this, because this actually hasn't changed in 12 months. I didn't know that statistic was the current year statistic. It was the same last year, and I was quite distressed. But I actually think it's because they don't have to. Organizations are not asking for this from them. And if you're not obliged to demonstrate impact, then why would you in some cases, And so it comes back to the point I made earlier about people not knowing what they don't know. And if people don't know that communication can make this impact on an organization, and they're not asking the communication function to demonstrate its impact on the business or organization, then they simply won't.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right, Neil. I think that's one of the biggest issues, that if the communication people aren't being held accountable, as Priya talked about, or if the leadership doesn't even know or doesn't care or don't want to know that the communication people should be trying to help improve communication issues, not necessarily just because of brochures or whatever, but communication issues with a capital C.
And just to sort of go on from there, I think that people, so IBC and other professional associations have their own standards of professional practice. All of those include measurement, and so those people who subscribe to those sorts of codes and ways of working will do this. My advice to anybody that's in an organization that is not asking for you to demonstrate impact is just do it anyway. I made a presentation a few years ago at IBC conference where I just advised everybody to just do it in hiding, just do it in secret if you need to. If nobody's asking you for it, that doesn't mean you don't do it. Do it anyway, and just don't tell anyone you're doing it, and you've got it there ready for when somebody does ask.
Isn't that wonderful about the gold quill process, though? I mean, that was my introduction to, as we evaluated and entered those awards, it really was about full circle. It was about setting your goals up front and aligning it to the business, and ensuring that you measured it at the end to demonstrate real success.
Right.
And I love that.
It changes your life forever. I mean, you don't do anything the same way ever again after you do it that way.
I want to share a comment from Bill Spaniel, came in through Twitter, saying, Jim's story illustrates that communication is not just words, but also behavior. In fact, the behavior of executives is far more important than what they say through standard communication vehicles. I think that's absolutely right. And communication, ultimately, I should say organizational communication, because not so much journalism, for example, is about influencing behavior, right? I mean, if you're not trying to get people to think, do, or say something, why are you communicating it? I remember, this was many, many years ago, that we still had the Print Communication World magazine, and the late Ed Robertson, who had been the head of internal communications at FedEx, which reported directly to the CEO, I might add, was not part of another department, had come up with, and it was a horrible name. He called it the Pyramid of Communication Quality. It was based loosely on Maslow's hierarchy, but essentially, if you picture the pyramid, there were 4 layers. The first was attention. He said, when you communicate, if you can't get there, first was logistics, actually. The idea that, for example, if you get benefits information 5 days after benefits enrollment ends, that's a logistical failure. If what you get comes in a language you can't understand, that's a logistical failure. Then comes attention. You have to be able to capture the attention of the people you're communicating with. If you can't capture their attention, they're not going to pay any attention. After that is relevance. What does it have to do with me? And by paying attention, is it going to have any impact on me? Will my life get better? Will I make more money? Will I get promoted? And only when you address those three layers do you get to the top of the pyramid, which is, what do you want from me? Do you want me to do something different? Do you want me to support something? Do you want me to advocate for something? What do you want? But if you fail at those three levels, you'll never get to the influence. You'll never get to the behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Shel, I think you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you brought up what I refer to as the say-do gaps in an organization. It was exactly what Bob encountered when I was working with him with the distribution center, that we said we said quality is important, but we are paying for productivity, which is having a negative impact on quality. I see that happening a lot, and we do a lot of surveys, a lot of research to identify the extent to which my boss says this, but does your boss actually live this? And many, many times, of course, we all understand this, that employees just watch what they do and follow what they do and don't necessarily follow what they say, because they're liable to get in trouble.
And I think sometimes when you communicate, if you don't address those key issues that are important to the individual, like you were talking, Shel, they're not going to listen to the rest of the message. I've been in a company that's been acquired, and then you get the new CEO that comes up there and stands in front of you and tells the whole workforce, this is our company's vision, and this is our guiding principles and all that. And at the end, he says, can I answer any questions for anybody? And this guy raises his hand immediately. He says, will I still be able to have the same parking spot? He wasn't listening to anything. He cared about that one thing about him that wasn't addressed yet. He wasn't going to get involved in anything like company's mission and vision or values until his own needs were addressed.
Yeah, good old Maslow.
Yeah. And it's the great balancing act, right? In the work that we do, there's the organizations we work for and what it needs to achieve versus the people that you're interacting with through your communication and how you're going to get them to the point that the organization needs to be. And I think that's where the magic starts to happen, is when you can really nail that balance.
And Neil, I want to share that Vic Morales says he agrees with what you said the last time you were talking. He says, this has saved me when it came time for job cuts and reorganization.
I would like to, Shel, add in here too that a very, very good book has recently been published by Roger Dupree. I know a lot of people know him. Shel and I are friends with him and participated in this new book. It's called Bosses, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I think it's one of the best books ever written about leadership and about bosses. And I've read, probably got 50 of them behind me on that shelf back there. Shel and I both were contributors to it, and I'm very proud to be a part of it. And I would really encourage all communication people to get the book, Bosses, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Which, by the way, will be the theme of our discussion in March, which I'll talk more about when we wrap up this episode. But Roger will be on that episode to talk about bosses and the effectiveness of managers and executives as communicators. Go back to measurement, the idea of listening through data. What should we be measuring? I think there are a lot of communication surveys out there that don't produce actionable results, or they produce results that prompt action on the wrong issues. What should we be asking?
Well, one of the things that most communication people have measured are things that have to do with fundamental communication stuff like awareness, understanding, acceptance, commitment, and all that stuff. Sometimes those have no effect whatsoever on the performance of the business. So I would go back, as I said at the beginning, I would go back and say, okay, what is it that makes us win or lose? What are the kind of measures that we ought to be focused on that will help us perform better? And that's going to be things more like quality, cost, speed, on-time delivery, scrap reduction, and things like that. It's not going to be the soft and fuzzy stuff that we've done in the past.
I worked with one organization that came to. They wanted a big video on safety, and it was too broad an issue. We managed to get them to talk more specifically about a concern they had about people having accidents on personal watercraft like jet skis. And we were able to kind of isolate the audience that we needed to be talking to and find the right channels to reach that audience, and then tie that to the real business objective, which was lowering accidents that caused lost time, productivity time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's this whole idea of like outcomes versus outputs, right? From a gold quill perspective, we can talk about speeds and feeds, but ultimately what we're doing is what's the impact on the business? What are those? And I talk about, you know, performance measures. How is the organization performing? Participation. What do we want employees to actually do that we can measure? Promotion. What are they saying? Can we capture that in some way or another? And then there is that softer piece for me from an engagement perspective. It's, can we measure pride? Because if we're not thinking about pride up front, we're not delivering from it. And that really is one of those softer measures that can make a big difference.
But you
How
know,
do you measure pride?
We do know that in engagement, for instance, we do know what contributes to that, and we can do surveys that ask fundamental questions about line of sight, involvement, understanding of the business strategy, and the extent to which I will benefit when I do these sorts of things. And so we do know about a softened thing called engagement, because we can put some dollar amounts and some numbers on that very easily.
There's also a whole set of issues like retention, where if communication is contributing to a great employee experience and high levels of engagement, you can correlate that to a reduction in people who are voluntarily terminating from the company.
Yeah. And now you've got a lot of talk around, I mean, I've been in retail for a long time, so NPS, which is Net Promoter Score, and eNPS has start finding its way inside organizations, which is one question. Would you recommend this organization to work for? Or would you recommend it to shop and buy products from?
Yeah.
It's one question that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I've used the Net Promoter Score about 5 times. It does work very well.
I think just to go back to the original question in terms of what you need to measure, I think it does depend on the project you're working on, and what that project is sort of really aiming to do. There will be times though where you're working on content that feels very disconnected from something that might be more akin to what my colleagues have just been talking about, and you will be required to post a random article on X, Y, or Z. And I think in those cases, I think it's just really important that you find a way of weaving it into an overall narrative, if you have one for the organization, that you help your audience know why they're interacting with that content, so that it doesn't remain this piece that's just out of left field, out of the blue, connects to nothing. People have no idea why they're interacting with that content. And when you do that, when you actually start to inject some of that purpose and you know, be very deliberate about why you're creating and posting that content, the measurement actually follows quite easily, because you can say at the outset, well, actually, I wanted to raise awareness about this really important topic, because it actually has a bearing on productivity or whatever. And because you know that go at the front end, on the back end, the measurement becomes a lot clearer.
We have questions and comments. Vic Morales asks, have any of you read or seen any recent reports or studies of the correlation between internal communication effectiveness and a company's stock price?
I haven't, no.
Not as direct as that, no.
I'd love to see it. I'd love to see some research on it, because I'm convinced that it's an integral enabler, and that the investment that organizations make, it makes a difference. With the Gatehouse report, it really just communicates to the communication professionals who are contributing to it. And what we're seeing is a trend in increasing in resources that companies are investing in, but a decrease in their bottom line budgets. And I'm curious about where that number comes from, but I'd love a correlation to best in class practices. We do from Gallup, I believe, see a correlation between engagement and bottom line results from those organizations. But I think you need to take a few steps to get to communication in particular.
And I have seen studies that draw correlations between communication and engagement. So you can probably connect the dots there. I am aware of one study. It is not recent by any stretch of the imagination, probably 15 years old at this point. It comes out of, I believe, Oxford School of Business. And it was related specifically to crisis communication. But what they did was they looked at a cohort of companies that had had crises where they had listened to the lawyers essentially and not said anything. There were no commenting as a result of what the lawyers wanted them to say. And another cohort where they communicated very effectively, and they looked at the share price immediately before the crisis, the first day after the crisis, and at the end of the fiscal year in which the crisis had happened. And they found that those companies that communicated effectively had their share price fall less the day of the crisis, and ultimately within a day or so had recovered, and by the end of the fiscal year had actually increased share price, whereas those who no commented had a steeper fall the day of the crisis, hadn't recovered the next day, and hadn't fully recovered by the end of the fiscal year. I think it's a powerful study. I wish they would redo it, and I wouldn't mind seeing it done with something other than just crisis. But that's the closest I've seen.
I think that Vic needs to patent this idea, because wouldn't it be powerful for somebody to be able to say that a company that invests in internal communication outperforms those that don't? I'd love to see that kind of research. You're onto something there, Vic.
The closest that I can vouch for is I did a project a little while back at FedEx Express. The issue was not enough export volume was flying out of the United States for other parts of the world. And they said that they thought that I could help them with the head of communication. And we had a pilot in Los Angeles, and we worked with the people out there, the leadership and the employees, to improve the export volume going out of there. And we found that the incentives were bad. They were sending people back to the station. That's what they referred to their operation as, a station, instead of trying to sell export volumes at the loading dock, couriers, and a number of other different kinds of things that the FedEx employees did not understand. Over a period of about it was about 3 months, we had a 23% increase in revenues and a 1,447% ROI. Dave Bronzak, who's now the CEO of FedEx, asked us to take it to 5 other locations. We went to Seattle, Denver, Miami, New York, and Chicago, and we got $6.1 million in sales and 1,660% return on investment. FedEx claims that because of this movement, and I believe that they are right because the numbers showed it, because of this kind of movement and attack on building that business, that enabled their stock price to go up.
Bill Spaniel has a couple of comments. First, you need to go to the people directly affected to find out what questions they have. They often are the ones who will ask the right questions. And then he says, listening is not a skill that is usually taught in most communication programs. How can we change that?
I actually think that is starting to change. I think we're going to see a lot more of that woven into formal programs.
And I think we use listening, but there is has always been taught is research. And it's really taking it, but they do it in a way that you think you're doing this research study once a year. And it really is, you're doing research every single time you're brought to a table to discuss a solution. And it's really thinking about how do you incorporate that behavior and those actions on a regular basis through your practice.
Is one of the reasons, Neil, that you think that this is changing because there is more data available to analyze?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that used to be the challenge, right? I can remember very clearly scrambling every month. I mean, I was one of those people who measured anyway. Nobody was asking me for it, but I needed to do that for my own sake. And gosh, I would be exhausted. By the time I gathered the data, I had zero energy to go through it and actually do anything with it. It was so exhausting gathering it from SharePoint and then from email and then from wherever else. So that's not the challenge anymore, in my view. We have the data in front of us. The real challenge is what we do with it now that we've got it in front of us, and the story that we tell. So yes, in answer to your question, I think that it is that much more available, and in a way, there's no excuse because it is at our fingertips should we choose to use it.
I had a HR VP I reported to in one of my jobs, and I kept asking if we could do, I don't think they called them engagement surveys yet that long ago, but a workplace environment survey. And he kept shrugging it off, and I guess he got tired of me asking because he got angry one day with me, and he said, look, I wrote a book on doing employee workplace environment surveys. I would love to do one, but the leaders of this company are not going to let us change anything as a result of the survey. So why ask if we can't change anything? And that was an excellent point. You do need to have the support to take action on what the survey reveals, don't you?
Yeah.
It's worse if you don't.
Yeah. And that's the challenge. I'm actually running an Engaging Employees conference for the first time in Canada out in Kelowna, BC in June. And it was really funny reading all of the submissions from HR and communication professionals who wanted to speak. And all of them talked about the fact that let's stop with the engagement surveys that nobody does anything about. We really need to talk about real engagement and how we really move the needles on things that matter to organizations. And it's just consistently, it's become such a buzzword that the conversation out there is that it doesn't exist because nobody ever does anything about it.
So in my company, we participate in the Bay Area Best Places to Work competition, which involves an engagement survey. So we get that data back and we share the results with the employees. Right now, there is a manager survey underway at the company. This is based on Google's manager survey, although we are not tracking who is responding, so we can't tie issues to an individual manager. We're looking for broader management issues that we can tackle through broader training. And then I have the internal comms survey going for the first time in 2 years next month. But it's access to these other surveys that are not coming through the internal comms department that provide a lot of fodder and a lot of information about where we need to direct communication efforts.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
So I think, for a lot of communicators, finding out what surveys are being done and asking if you can get your hands on them. I imagine there are a lot of communicators who've never seen the engagement survey results that, HR
doesn't want to share with it. But that's the other thing, that's the value of those employer of choice programs, whether it's local or national or global in nature, is that you also have benchmarking, right? So you can compare how your organization is doing versus others. I'll tell you, I shared that chart on the average number of communication practitioners in internal communication from the Gatehouse survey, and the number of people who contacted me saying, where's this data from? Is this the fact that so many organizations have very little investment in that space, and they see the data makes them say, I'm not the same, or I'm below what's the benchmark. And that's an ego play, right? That when they see what other companies are doing and they don't feel they're up to snuff, then it gives them something that they can talk about.
Yes. Yeah.
So there are companies out there that hire communicators to be tacticians, to jump when executives say jump. I did an internal communications audit for one healthcare system, whose name you would recognize, and not far from you, Jim. And what I found was that because this internal communications department was funded by the various schools in the university. It's a teaching hospital. That every dean felt that they owned the internal communications department. So they were constantly putting out fires from a dean who would say, I need you to communicate this, I need you to communicate that. And they had no time to execute on any kind of a strategy. They were just constantly putting out these short-term tactical fires. What do you do if you work for an organization that isn't looking for communications to do this, but you know it can contribute? How do you make that case?
I have an impact matrix that's available on my website, innerstrengthcommunication.com, where we actually talk about the impact of what you're doing and the resources that are spent. And you find very clearly, like, those things that have high impact and high resources, those are your investments. Those areas where you have high impact and low resources, those are your quick wins in your day-to-day, your everyday. But there's a lot on the other side of that matrix that is low impact, high cost or low cost. That's your waste of time and your waste of money. I encourage communication professionals to actually track their work against it and then have a conversation with their boss, with their internal clients, and say, here's how I'm seeing this. Why is what I'm working on important? And how do we get rid of the stuff that's a waste of time and money so that we can work on what really matters?
That is sometimes referred to, or I've referred to it, Priya, as a value to cost assessment, which basically is looking at the importance and the performance of various communication channels and concepts and that sort of thing. I like it. It's very, very impactful.
My advice to anyone in that situation is just to be really patient. Do the things that Priya and Jim just talked about, but and just do it anyway. Do the measurement anyway, because the people who are asking for those things are not asking for the strategic input. Just do it anyway. Arm yourself, and then when the time is right, bust out all of those stats.
And also find that one leader. Find that one leader in one project. There's always one who gets it, who wants to do things differently. And that's where, I when I worked at Loblaw Companies Limited, which is Canada's largest private sector employer, we started with that one project. And then all of a sudden people take a look and say, why was that one different? Why did it have the impact it had? And then more leaders start coming to you and say, I want what they had. And we ended up, growing a team that was 2 tactical team members to 17 dedicated strategic practitioners dedicated to internal communication because of that one job at a time. And one win at a time. So find that one, find that diamond in the rough, where you can demonstrate and then talk about it, because we don't brag enough as practitioners.
You get them to talk about it.
Both.
Yeah. Get them to be your champion.
I think they are champions when you have the right leaders, but I think we should also step out of our shells and be ready to say, here's what we did, and here's where it had impact on the business. Because if nobody else is going to talk about it for you, we have to actually stand up for ourselves and communicate our impact. And that's something that's different when we're behind the scenes.
You're giving
when
me
you have that kind of success, you enter the Gold Quill Award and you write it all out.
True.
And you show what you did.
Absolutely.
One of the things that you're reminding me of is the importance of having a value proposition. And as a communication practitioner or department or function, one of the best that I have seen was Teresa Paulson, who was the head of communication at Conagra Foods when I was working with her. She's now consulting, but their value proposition is, we either make money or save money. If it doesn't make money or save money, we don't do it.
Well, that's a great place to end the conversation, as we have about a minute and a half left. And I swear I don't have coronavirus, so, and even if I did, you couldn't get it through the internet.
What was that ship you were on over the weekend?
That's right. Yeah, it's coming back from Wuhan, right? I do want to let everybody know about what's coming up next month. This is on Thursday, March 19th. Jim, you telegraphed this nicely. We will be talking about bosses, true stories of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Anna Willie, who is our behind-the-scenes coordinator for Circle of Fellows. This wouldn't happen without her. She's written up a little paragraph that says the book is a candid and provocative new book in which communication and leadership expert Roger Dupree asserts that many leaders are ignoring the proper selection, training, development, and ongoing support of the mid-level bosses they entrust to manage company talent. We're in the midst of this at WebCore, trying to make this transition in the construction industry from autocratic order givers to coaches who help guide people through their careers and equip them with the skills and the development that they need to be able to do the job, do better jobs of listening, do better jobs of caring, and do better jobs of focusing on the needs of the individuals. Involved in this panel, we will have 5 instead of 4 participants. Roger is joining us, which is very exciting. I think he's only done one of these circles before. We will be joined by Bish Mukherjee, Angela Sinicus, Stacy Wilson, and Jim. You'll be back for this one.
I will be back.
You wouldn't miss one with Roger, huh?
No. Too close a friend.
Great, thanks. Well, it is the top of the hour, so we're done. Thanks, everybody, for taking an hour to engage in this conversation, and thanks to Anna for her behind-the-camera work, which, as I mentioned before, is the only reason this thing happens at all. So, see you all next month.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Being self